Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel where we are discussing logic apps in detail for the integration program. Today in this episode, we are going to discuss about the data operations in logic app. Let's first of all understand why do we need the data operations in logic app, and then we'll have a demonstration and try to understand how do you perform the data operations in logic app. So taking a scenario, we have a JSON object which requires to be processed in the logic app, and that data which we require to process in your business logic or the integration workflow, it might possible you have a requirement to filter out the data, or you would like to filter or select some of the column or some of the attribute of that particular data, or maybe you would like to join an additional information to the existing data which you have received in your workflow. In such cases, it might possible you would like to have an action in place which is provided by logic app, or you might want to write your own custom actions to provide these kind of a feature or capabilities. To do that, we can use the data operations actions or data operation connectors, and that is what we are going to look at. That is what we are going to discuss in this particular demonstration. Hi, my name is Rakesh Suryavanshi and you're watching Be a Learner. So for the demonstration, I have this logic app created, which is of type standard, and we'll create a workflow in this logic app for the demonstration. First of all, let's understand what kind of data we'll have in our workflow with the help of the example file, which I have it here. So if you look at this Visual Studio Code sample JSON file, here I have an array of address lines. So I have array which contains multiple addresses. So this is the address one, which is of type of home address. It has the address line 1, 2, and then other details. As you can see, pretty much simple, as it is a collection of elements. So this array contains multiple, may one or more elements of the address. And you can see that for this example, we have address which is of type home and address which is of type office. Now consider that in our workflow, we are going to receive this kind of a data which requires to be processed. And let's say we have a requirement to filter out, give me all the address which needs to be, which is of type home address or of type office address. If you would like to filter out this, let's see that how do you do that. So first of all, I'll go ahead and create a workflow. So here in the workflow, I'll add new workflow. I'll call it as data operations workflow. Create it. It is going to be a type of a stateful workflow so that we can see the history and the logs and all. The workflow is created. Let's open the designer of the workflow. I'll go to the designer. And from here, as we always do, we have to define the trigger for the logic app. And for the simplest trigger, I'm going to define the trigger as an recurrence trigger. You can also define the HTTP trigger type. Let's say we have a trigger running every 15th of month. I'll define a next action, which for this reason, I'm going to use a variable so that I'll define the variable and I'll use that data as a variable. So I'll call it as in address data. Okay. I'll say it is a type of array, and then I'll go back to the my sample JSON file, and this is where I'm going to define or initialize the variable. If you have the logic app as an HTTP trigger, then of course that HTTP request can contain the data, but this is the simplest demonstration I'm using, so I'll define the hard-coded data value here. Now, as it is successfully, we have saved this data. Let's add a new action item. Now, let's say I would like to add a custom attribute, or maybe let's say I would like to filter out the object, right? Let's say I would like to filter out the data based on the home address type like we discussed. So for this reason, we are going to use this data operations custom data operations connector. which is of type built-in connector. And if you look at these actions, in that under the actions section, we have multiple actions which we can use. Now, first of all, we are going to use the filter action as we have mentioned. So here in the filter action, you have to define from where you would like to filter. So as in this case, I would like to filter from this address variable type, so which will have my array element. Remember that it has to be an array because we would like to filter out of the collection. And now from here, we are going to specify what would be the condition on what basis you would like to filter out the data. So as our array element says that each array would have certain attributes in a proper structure, and you can see that I have an address type as an structure, so I would like to have a filtration on that. So first of all, what I'm going to do is you need to choose a value, and for that we are going to use expression, and for the expression we are going to use the item column, and an item will represents to a particular record within the array. And now from to specify the condition from that record and within that record we would like to use an attribute of that record, then we need to specify that attribute with the question mark and the name of the attribute like this. So this is going to be your current record on which it will run the loop and it will check the condition, and then within the current record you would have the attribute on which you would like to apply the condition. Okay, I'll say yes, add it, and again you have to add in condition. You have to specify whether it is a contains condition, equals to, not equals to, greater than, or there are so many conditions available which you can specify here. Now you need to specify what value you would like to add in condition 2. So you can say that whether address is of type home or it is of type office. So based on that you can check that. So I would say it's home, and that is what the value I'm going to provide. I can also do I can add a parameter for that. I'll say that's address type, let's say address underscore types. So I'm going to create a parameter which is of type string. Let's type home. Okay, that's going to be my parameter is created. Now what I can do is I can use this address type parameter to evaluate the condition, and this is the filter condition has been added now. Okay, so that's about the filter condition. Now let's save this condition for now, and this is how it looks like, equals to this. And if you would like to add few more conditions, I think you can append this particular JSON, but unfortunately in this UI this condition is not available. You cannot have and, or, and all those conditions, at least from UI perspective. I believe you can add those conditions in the JSON format, but here in the UI you can only specify one condition to filter out. Our workflow is saved now. Let's look at the workflow by running our trigger. So I'm going to run trigger. It's run successful. Let's see if our result is getting filtered or not. So that's our initialize variable where we had our original data which had two records. One is of type office address and one is of type home address. And let's look at the filter address. Now if you look at our filter point of view from, which is the original input data which contains both the type of address, and this is going to be output which just contains one address. So now if I just expand it as a result output, as you can see here, this would only have the record which are matching with this address type, which is a type home. So this is one thing which you can do to filter out and collection from using this data operation. Now let's look at about the next data operation which you can have it with this. So let's take an example, one more example, that if I have an output of this filtered array which is going to be one array element, and I would like to add an attribute to that particular array record. Let's say, for example, I'll go back to the sample JSON. So let's say this was our original collection, and then now we have filtered out the home address of a customer, let's say, with the filter condition. Now what next we want to do, we would like to, let's say, add an additional property. I'll say that as in mark email address, let's say, and let's say ABC could be anything. Okay, I would like to add this property after I filter out the data, right? If I want to do this from my logic app, then how do I do that? So what I'm going to do here, I'll just copy this, I'll go to the workflow again, and from this I'll add another action. So for this, I'm going to again use the data attribute. This time I'm going to use the compose operation, and from that compose I will say the result body of this, and first of all I'll add a parameter so that I know what I would like to add. So here I'll add that email address as equals to this parameter name, and then the value of the email address, let's say, which is this. So we added the email address parameter. Now what I want to do with this compose object is join email to home address. Now if that is something we want to do, I'll just simply copy this and I'll go to the expression, and within the expression what you can do is, because it's going to be a 0th index, right? 0th index of this property, which is this one, and out of the 0th index I would have the address, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use add property method. So add property method, you can add an property which you can say in which object you would like to add in property, what is the name of your property, which is email, okay, email underscore address, for example. Now after that what I want to do is I would like to set the value of that property, and for that you go to the dynamic content and then use this email address, because that is what I want to set, right? I would like to go to email address, that's what I have set, which is the parameters like this. That's it. I'll save it, and that becomes the entire expression. So what we are doing to add an additional attribute, we are using the built-in method available within the logic app, which is add property, and within the JSON object we are adding a property which is of email address, and again we are doing within the same data operation block. I'll save this and let's have a run. It has run successfully. Let's verify the result. Okay, so if I go to the join email address, that was my original input. Now within the original input you can see that output has got now the email address which I have specified. Again it has some spaces, but that's okay. I hope you have got the point. Now we have added a new attribute to our JSON data using the add attribute property within the data operations block. So that's the example number 2. Now let's look at another example of the data operations. So example as in, let's say I'll go back to the JSON. Let's say I have this JSON block. Now within this JSON block, what I want to do, I would like to select, let's say I would like to select, I would like to select the first line of address from both the address type. Okay, so how do I do that? So it could be, let's say this array could have any number of record, and out of this I would like to select some property. So how do I do that? Okay, I'll go back to the workflow. Now here in the workflow we'll add another action. We'll use the same data compose attribute, and this time we are going to use a select operation. So think about select as in a select from a table or select from a collection, and what do you want to select, right? That's what you need to specify. So from where, so you would like to select from a collection, and the collection we have it in our variable. So I'll choose a variable, and this time you need to specify what property you would like to select. So think about the SQL expression where you say select column, which is the name of the column, and I would say that the address line 1, I'll just make sure that I have the column name correctly specified. So I'll copy this column name, address line 1, and then the value of the address line. So sorry, the select means that you have to specify as column the name of the select column which you would like to give, and then you have to specify what do you want to select. So in this case I would like to select an address line. So again I'm going to use the expressions, and here I'll say item, again question mark, and then I know that each item would have the address line, so I'll say yes. So that's going to return the address lines for the first line of address for each record. Let's save this and quickly run that as well. That was run successfully. Let's look at the result. You can see that from that original collection, I'm able to select those two properties. So first line of address from the first contact, I have 36 Main Street, and then the second line of address is 121 University Hall building. So that's about the select operation, which you can use, very handy. Now let's think about a next set of operation which is available with the JSON. So now if you look at our implementation so far, whenever we were using we wanted to use an attribute out of this JSON or the original JSON, or let's say I would like to use an attribute, I need to use certain functions. For example, I was using an item function and all. But what if I would like to parse this JSON into or parse this particular input JSON against a particular schema, and I would like to use those schema attribute going forward in the subsequent step, then what do I need to do? And for that you have the parse action in place. So let's say that I have the actions, new action, which I'll be using data operation, and for that I'm going to use parse JSON. And for that parse JSON, you need to specify the content which you would like to parse and the schema against which you would like to parse the content, right? So for the content, I'm going to use the same content, which is a JSON content. And from here, upload JSON, I'm going to use the JSON object to create an schema. Okay, so I'll copy the same JSON object, which is this one. I'll upload it here, and that has created an schema object for me. And now that JSON object will validate against this incoming that JSON object which is coming, which is validated against this particular schema. Now the good thing about this is if I go to the next action, let's say define a new block, which is a data operation compose block, right? Here what I can do is I can get now each and individual properties of those data, right? If you look at this, I'm getting now address line 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, right? So let's look at that. We are able to read that property. So I will say that postcode, which I would like to compose a new JSON out of the JSON which we have received. So what I can do is now, let's say this one, right? Now this has automatically added a for each loop for me. As soon as I've added on that compose block, it has added a for each loop. The reason for that is because the type of JSON what we have here in the source, it is of type array. If you look at this, right, and it's going to return an array. So as soon as we have started using that compose block or attribute of that JSON parse output, our logic app automatically knows that the output of this is going to be an array, so it has automatically added the for each loop. It means that you, in order to use any of the attribute, you have to have the for each loop attribute in place, right? Let me use this run right now. I'll save it. Now, if I go to this for each loop or the parse JSON, this parse JSON has validated the content against this schema, and this is my output type, which is of this result. Now, as we know that our array element contains 2 records, so this for each loop has run 2 times, and from that 2 times we are returning, first time we are returning this particular postal code, and second time we are returning, we are receiving this particular postal code, right? So that's again, the parse JSON could be another handy tool which you can use with the data operations while defining your workflow. Now let's understand one of more requirement wherein you might have a requirement to basically create a CSV out of the JSON array object. So if I have a JSON array, which in this case a collection of address, and I would like to convert that into a CSV, then what do? Do I need to write a custom .NET or Java code to convert that array into a CSV, or I can do it without that? So to do that, what you can add here is you can also use the same data operation. And if you have realized that we have the create CSV table, create HTML table. So when I use the create CSV table, it will ask from where you need to create a CSV table. Again, I'll use the same variable which has my collection, and then you can specify whether it is automatic or a custom type in terms of defining the column. So I'll leave this as is to make this CSV table as in automatic column value. Now let's look at the program from the perspective of using or defining an array element. Let me see that if I can create a JSON as well, or the XML as well. So if I can do that, from this I'll choose an XML compose output, and from here I'll use the expression, and we have the XML function, right? Within the XML function, it is asking for the string. So I may need to create a string element, and let me see that we have any string element available. So what I can do is I can use this, or maybe I'll say 0th element, okay, and that could add as in JSON, or let's say create XML. I'm not sure if it will work. Maybe let's say save it. Okay, that's saved successfully. Let's run that again. So it has failed, possibly in the XML step. Let's save. Let's have a look at it. Yeah, as I understood. But now if you look at the CSV type, which is it is accepting these array element, and then from that array element it is successfully creating the CSV type, right, which you can see it right here from this particular section. So that's pretty much easy. Now what is the error we have got here? It says that XML data cannot be converted to data, root level is invalid. So I think there is some work needs to be performed here, but you can use that XML function, or there are so many built-in functions available which you can utilize like this. I have done it, and perform your operations what you want to do with the data operations connector. And this is a very widely used handy connector which you can use in your day in day out work within the workflow design. I hope you have found this useful. If it is, please give it a thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Thanks for watching it. See you in the next video.